Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about when party conflict leads to a PC retiring. But first, it's been a few weeks since I've made a video, and that's been by intention. When I first started making DM Diaries, the tagline was that I hope that any viewers have valuable takeaways from my shenanigans, and I slowly started to feel like a weekly recap video did not support that theme. Some episodes would be packed with DM lessons, and others would be bog standard sessions with not much commentary actually needed. If you're new here, I've been running my players through my adaptation of Against the Cult of the Reptile God, and about 3 sessions ago they made it to the dungeon. A 10-minute video that could be boiled down to the players progressed through the dungeon and got in a lot of fights didn't seem particularly valuable to anyone. But in the background, there's been an RP conflict brewing, and I figured, let's wait for it to boil to a head at the end of this arc, and I could do a whole video discussing it. That way we get a more themed video, and anyone interested can scoop it up, and anyone not can pass it by. So let's just get right into it. On Friday nights, I run a campaign called Dark Delusions. It takes place in Iskrva, a homebrew continent of mine that is very Victorian dark fantasy. Think Castlevania. There's mining villages that get attacked by things that go bump in the night, and there's monster hunters who answer the call to stop them. But in character creation, my players had an interesting take. Many players chose characters that might be viewed to the villagers as either monsters or outsiders. There's Sayri, a satyr bard from the Fae. Stephen Stoker, a very pale warlock whose patron is a lich. There's Reginald. He's a member of the Monster Hunting Guild, but he was recently bit and turned into a werewolf. There's Danny, a literal ghost, using Matthew Mercer's Lingering Soul class. There's Shivas, a UNT cleric masquerading as Valerie, a knight. There's Aster, she is a sorcerer from the swamp. And there's Otto, he's a tiefling wizard, and he's also an alchemist for a thieves guild. They're my merry little band of misfits and outcasts, but a few weeks ago the player... Oh, there's a cat in the background. A few weeks ago, the player who plays Sayri approached me asking if she could retire her character at the end of the current story arc. She first came up with the character about 4 years ago during another campaign that I was running, but sometimes when you wait too long to play a character, you just have other ones that you're itching to play more. She has this really cool elf artificer in mind that she thinks she's going to have a lot more fun playing. I wouldn't even have to find a way to shoehorn her out of the game either. Sayri feels like an outcast amongst even the group, being a satyr from the Fae while everyone else is either from Iskrva or pretending to be. We both identified together a pair of NPCs in the current arc who her character kind of vibed with more than the party, and it would be reasonable for her character to travel with them instead at the end of this arc. And I thought that would be that, a fairly low impact character swap, not much emotional RPing, etc., but I was wrong! As I said before, the current story arc is an adaptation of Against the Cult of the Reptile God, except I've replaced the Reptile God with a succubus. Essentially, the party arrived in town and about half the population has already been charmed by her, and they're serving as members of her cult. Citizens are dragged to the bottom of the mines, and they're charmed by the succubus. If the charm fails, then they are turned into undead by her necromancer. The players discovered the villain's plot and invaded the mines to put a stop to this evil once and for all. In one of the dungeon rooms, though, I put an undead woman. She was weak and unable to move at all. I clearly demonstrated that she wasn't acting as a threat in the moment. Unlike the other zombies they fought so far, this one could speak, and she started asking the party for help. She seemed to the party to be unaware of exactly how much time had passed, and she was definitely unaware of the fact that she was no longer human, but she had a terrible hunger. If engaged, she could provide valuable information on the trials that the party faced ahead, but most of the party was mistrusting. They viewed her as a potential trap or hazard if they helped her. When fed a ration, the undead woman still seemed weak. When given a piece of one of the cultists that the party had killed earlier, she regained some of her strength. Uh-oh. At that point, most of the party was unwilling to help her or get information from her. In fact, they were discussing whether to just leave her there, unable to move, or to put her out of her misery. This line of dialogue was noticeably a big problem for both Sayri and Danny, especially Danny. They were upset that the rest of the party viewed her as a monster and not a victim of the villain's actions. They didn't like that the party was discussing what to do with this undead woman as if she wasn't in the room with them. But most of the rest of the party are role-playing native Iskrivans, and it's not a nice place to grow up. Their characters believe that there's a fundamental difference between a ghost like Danny and a corporeal undead that needs to eat sentient flesh to survive. Reginald is a monster slayer. It sucks, but he feels he has a responsibility to save those who are still alive from the threat that this undead woman might present one day. So he takes matters into his own hands, and he puts her out of her misery. It is at that moment that Danny decides that she is going to leave the party once they stop the succubus. Sayri is also disillusioned with the party, and her player is working her out of the story naturally, so she says that she'll go with Danny. And we ended that session on kind of a cliffhanger that some party members may retire very, very soon. After that session, the player who plays Danny told the other players that it's possible to get Danny to stay if it's role played out well. So a few of the party members prepared speeches and dialogue for the following week. The next week, they made it to the bottom of the mines, slayed the succubus, and saved the town. But at what cost? Their fellow party member might leave. The players know that a fresh new party member would just show up next week, but their characters don't, and that prospect's set in some of them. So Esther expresses to Danny that she's really, really sorry for what happened, that no one considered Danny's perspective, and that in the future the party would try to make it right. Danny simply replies that it's too late to make it right. She is already dead. Reginald, the monster hunter, tries next. He knows that in some way, Danny sees herself in the undead who is slain. He expresses that he would never do that to her and that he would never hurt her, that he wants to support Danny in whatever way she desires. He used to want to fix Danny by helping her become human again, but Danny has no memories of her life before. Being a ghost is all she knows, and she doesn't view herself being a ghost as a problem to be solved. And Reginald, for the first time, expresses that he finally understands that. This seems to move Danny a bit, but she asks, what happens next time? And Reginald says that he won't jump the gun, that in the future he will confer with everyone in the party to make hard decisions like the one that he had made. And that's where he lost Danny. See, from Danny's perspective, the choice is not the party's to make. She views humans, as well as beings like herself and the undead girl, as all being equally capable of being monsters. What makes one a monster is their actions. If a creature chooses to be a monster through their actions, they've made their choice. Until they try to hurt someone, it's not the party's choice to make who is a monster and who is not. Once again, a clash of perspectives, but it's a very good one. Ultimately, nothing of what anyone said was what Danny needed to hear, but now it makes the parting so much harder. She cares for the party and they care for her, but she has to leave with Sayri, because she cannot bear to see the party choose to be the monsters and not give others the choice. As they say their goodbyes, the party is hit with one final gut punch. Stephen Stoker, the warlock whose patron is a lich, reveals to Danny a bit of his past. He doesn't want to be a patron to this lich, and he is desperately trying to get out of his pact. He's been killed by his patron and resurrected over and over and over again. He, just like Danny, sees himself in the undead woman. But it was because he saw himself in her that he felt like she needed to be put out of her misery. It was the more humane thing to do. They understood each other now, Danny and Steven, but ultimately came to different conclusions, and the broken path before them could not be mended. So Danny left with Sayri, both becoming just silhouettes in the distance until they were gone. End session. Many tears were shed over Discord that night, but they weren't bad tears. I felt a very real emotional catharsis that night, the same way you feel when there's a really sad but satisfying character death in a TV show you love. So let me be clear here. There was no player conflict here at all. None whatsoever. This was a character conflict. all of the players role-played their characters in ways that they believed did the story and their characters justice. Everyone understands, out of character, that there were two perspectives being presented here, and neither side was objectively right or wrong, but it made total sense in character for each to believe and act as they did. For authenticity, I interviewed the player of Danny about their decision to retire her, and they had this to say. Am I sad that I'm not going to play Danny anymore? Yes, of course. I loved Danny, but it felt like the right thing to do to move the story along. If Ned Stark was a D&D character, would his player want to keep playing him? Of course. But Ned's death adds to the story rather than takes away from it. I am willing to sacrifice my character onto the altar of the story to make great moments. As for me, Clay, I know that this player, they're going to come to the table next week just as excited for their new character. That player's style of roleplay is awesome, but I also don't want to present it like it's better than any other way that people play the game. Some players roleplay because it's fun to play as their characters, to show up to the table and get into someone else's head for a while. They love their character and wouldn't sacrifice them because they want to show up every single week to continue playing this character that they love. I think for others though, it's fun to use their roleplay to tell cool stories and create memorable moments for the table, even if it means they will have to kill or retire their character. And there's no right or wrong way to play the game. Do what's cool to you, and both styles are equally virtuous as long as everyone at the table is having a great time. But if you like Danny's style of roleplay, I say go for it. But I think it requires a lot of care, thought, and time. If your table is kind of new to the game, or even new at interacting with one another, be sure to communicate your intentions every step of the way. Danny's player effectively stirred a party conflict, but instead of everyone feeling like it was a disruption or an interruption, it was quite the opposite. We have never been more invested. But that sort of a dynamic between the table didn't grow overnight. These players have all been playing together for years, and there's a lot of trust at the table. They trust that when one player stirs a conflict, it is not for self-interest or PvP, but it's to create a collaborative, memorable tale that could be told by no other group at no other table. And I'm really lucky that I get to run the game every week for this group. I really wanted to share this story this week because I think it displays a different style of roleplay than one that is seen very often. Many of you know that players come to the table for different reasons. Some love roleplay, others love challenging combat, others just want to hang out with their friends on a Friday night. But even within just the aspect of roleplay, different players can have fun in vastly different ways, and that is just so cool. If you have made it this far, I really hope you were able to take away something valuable from this video. It's time for a little bit of shameless self-promotion, so if that's not your thing and this is where we part ways, I understand. Perhaps our paths will inevitably cross once again in a far-off tavern. I've now got a website. I am beginning to run games professionally over Roll20 and Discord. I've got a bunch of pre-generated one-shots, adventures, and campaigns that you can check out. So if you want to get a group together and play D&D with me, you can find me over at conjureclay.com. If you don't have a group, feel free to still reach out. If there's enough interest, perhaps I can put together a pickup game. I am also working on a video on homebrewing boss encounters, so you can look out for that one in the future. Lastly, all of the character art shown in this video was done by one of my players! You can find her on Instagram at mpcd_art, so if you liked her art as much as I do, go over to her Instagram and show her some support. That is it for me today, guys. If you liked this video, please consider liking or subscribing for more content. If you have any questions or you want to tell me about your cool moments, throw a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I am Clay, and I hope that each and every one of you has a wonderful day.